What's up, everybody, and welcome to the midway point of 2023. Believe it or not, the year is halfway in the books, so no time like the present for Red Okamoto, Marc, and Carlos Contreras to join me, Phil Murphy, and look back at the first half of the year that was in the world of the UFC and look ahead on what we are excited to see coming up. Guys, I want all of your opinions on this. Brett, I'll start with you. What is the biggest surprise of 2023 thus far?
I got to go with Alexa Grasso. Even, it wasn't one of those situations. There have been some of these fights with Valentina Shevchenko, Amanda Nunes, where you're like, man, these guys could fight 100 times, and I just don't know what her opponent is going to do to overcome the greatness, that is Nunes and Shevchenko. This was not one of those. You could kind of feel like Grasso could make this fight competitive, but if we're all being honest, she was a nearly 6-1 underdog, so it wasn't shocking, not the biggest thing we've ever seen. But in terms of this year, I would say Alexa Grasso beating Valentina Shevchenko was the biggest surprise of the year.
I mean, I want to agree with Brett, but I also want to combine the retirement of Amanda Nunes, because I feel like just in the first half of this year, we've seen the greatest women's fighter of all time retire, step away from the sport, and Valentina Shevchenko, who was, number two. They were number two, 1 and 2 pound for pound for the last 5+ years, right? Nunes and Shevchenko. One of them lost their title. One of them is gone from the sport. And just like the upheaval of what that looks like for women's MMA in the UFC. I mean, even outside the UFC, we haven't even seen Kayla Harrison fight this year yet. There's a lot of question marks, and I'm sure there will be a big rebound and there'll be a resurgence. But that's been the biggest surprise for me, is just kind of like, where does women's MMA go without the GOAT and without, Shevchenko at the top of that division?
Yeah, I'll have to agree with Brett. I mean, even I was close with the camp with Alexa, and she has a lot of confidence that she could do it. I mean, coming to the fight week, I mean, everyone was saying this is gonna be another of Valentina's great performance, and she's gonna win this easily. And at the end, the way it ended, I mean, it was not a close decision or something like that. It was a very dominant submission. I mean, she totally there's no doubt that she beat Valentina. So I think that might be the biggest surprise. And also that same night, I was really surprised that Jon Jones beat so easily Cyril Gane. I think we were all expecting a more competitive fight. I mean, we were all in doubt of what was going to happen with Jon in a higher division, but I mean, he looks so dominant that it was really surprising for me. I mean, what can he do to another heavyweights?
Yeah, and with Grasso, somebody who debuted in the strawweight division, she's going up to flyweight against Valentina, somebody coming down from bantamweight. The calculus didn't seem to be there. That was my biggest surprise. Calculus didn't seem to be there for Valentina to get her first loss as a UFC flyweight in that title fight, specifically to Grasso. Brett, for you, what was the biggest storyline of the first half of 2023?
I think it has to be Francis Ngannou signing with the PFL, just because it was something we had been monitoring for so long. I mean, this was a story that goes back even beyond 2022 into the second half of 2021, when you knew his contract was coming up and you knew that he was asking for certain things that the UFC wasn't going to budge on. And there were a lot of questions around where Ngannou was going to go, what his contract was going to look like. The industry was watching it very, very, very carefully because of how it will impact maybe the way that some of them go about their free agencies. So I think that has to be the top story. But I got to say, another one is just monitoring. Conor McGregor has participated in a reality show and says he's going to fight. I believe he wants to fight. Is the guy actually going to fight? I think that's been a storyline as well, and it's going to continue to be. But if I have to go with one, it's Ngannou going to the PFL.
Hard to argue with what Brett said, but I'll throw another one out there. How about 3 Mexican MMA champions in the UFC in a span of just a few months, right? When it's Brandon Moreno winning the title back from Figueiredo, Alexa Grasso shocking Shevchenko, Yair Rodriguez beating Josh Emmett for the interim title, and now we have Moreno and Rodriguez on the same card, UFC 290 coming up, with 2 Mexican champions and the main event and the co-main event. That's pretty unbelievable when you consider that there really hasn't been so much of a culture for MMA in Mexico until maybe the last 10 years or less. I think the first Mexican-born MMA fighter, it's kind of questionable who it was, because Efrain Escudero might have been the first, but he really came up on the scene in the United States less than Mexico. Was it Goyito Perez in 2012? Of course, the Ultimate Fighter was in 2014. That was only 9 years ago. And now we're talking about 3 champions from that country. And a lot of it happened just this year. And we're only halfway through the year. So I think that's a pretty big storyline so far this year in the UFC.
Yeah, I'll have to agree with Mark. And it's also, it's been 10 years since the first event is going to be in 2014, 180, when Cain Velasquez was supposed to fight Verdum. It ended up happening in 188. But it just these last 10 years since the very first development program where Jair and Brandon were there, it's been a lot of improvement. This PI in Mexico City coming. So it's probably the next 5 years, it's going to be a lot more Mexican ranked fighters, because right now, other than the 3 champions and Irene Aldana, there's no one else on the top 15 ranks in any division. So I think that will be something we have to look up in the second semester. Not right now is 20 Mexican-born fighters in the UFC roster, which is something that never happened before. So I think this is going to keep growing in the next couple of years. But I also would like to say that one of the biggest storylines is the rivalry between one of the biggest combat sport rivalry ever between Alex Pereira and Israel Adesanya. I mean, the way it ended, that fight, that the beef is still going, even if it's friendly. Like we saw when they find each other in the airport or something like that. I mean, so I think I mean that is the kind of stuff that makes this sport grow and to people to keep following guys like them.
Carlos, you wrote my segue for me. That's beautiful. Brett Okamoto, best fight of 2023. I imagine Adesanya Pereira is one of them. For you, what was the best?
Islam versus Volk. It's not even close. Izzy Pereira was great. It was a very, very top moment in the sport's history. Like I felt honored to have been there just to see it. But same with Islam and Volk. It was just mixed martial arts at its highest level. 2 absolute experts doing what they do, and then you add in the fact that it was in Perth with the Australian crowd. That crowd was extremely loud. Yeah, I wouldn't have been sitting here going into 2023 thinking that like I want to see this fight twice. I want to see this fight twice. I do hope we get Volkanovski and Islam again at some point, and that was one of the best fights I've seen in a long time.
Mark, what's yours?
Totally agree with Brett. I mean, it has to be Makhachev and Volkanovski. It was billed as number 1 versus number 2 pound for pound in the world, and it lived up to that completely. The expectations were high, and it met them, if not exceeded them. That fight was incredible. It was dramatic every single moment. Volkanovski came on late, landing big ground and pound in the 5th round against, a much bigger man. Just a tremendous fight, bell to bell, and that's going to be a hard one to beat, just considering all the stakes at play, the pound for pound, the lightweight title. I mean, everything that Brett said. It was just it was the highest level of MMA. It just does not get better than that.
I would say that obviously Islam against Volkanovski is a most technical fight of the year, but the way that how electric was Pereira against Izzy. I mean, it felt like every second someone was gonna go down, and then Alex hits hard Izzy, and Izzy comes back, and I think that the atmosphere there in Miami was incredible, and was because of that. I mean, a lot of people were expecting Izzy playing safe in that fight, having his legacy on the line, and it needed, I mean, to turn this because he was losing every time with Alex. So the fact that he went and took that risk and went for the finish, I love that fight and how it ended up happening. So my best fight of the year is Izzy against Pereira. 4.
It's hard to argue with either of those choices, but we can pare it down a little further. As great as Makhachev against Volkanovski was, it was a decision. Brett, what was your favorite finish of the first half of 2023?
Well, here it is. Then this is Izzy. This is Izzy versus Alex Pereira. And, watching it live, I wanted to get crazy and say, like, man, this is like a top 5 finish. But then you start thinking about, like, all the great finishes in UFC history. And this one was ridiculously good. It was a right hand along the fence. But what made it so special was all the context. If you knew everything going into this fight, then you're just like, oh my God, I can't believe it happened like that. I can't believe the celebration, maybe the top celebration of all time. So I would say that this was a top 20 knockout in the UFC's entire history, and it's definitely the best one of the year so far.
You won't find me disagreeing with Brett on this one either. I mean, it was an all-time moment to me. Being there watching it, I thought when that happened, this was the career-defining moment for Israel Adesanya. He's already done so much, right? He's already done so much in the UFC. He's already one of the best pound for pound. He's already one of the best middleweight champions of all time. But this was the career-defining moment. Literally his back against the wall against the guy who's beaten him 3 times in 2 different combat sports. And he goes out and absolutely knocks him out cold. The celebration, the atmosphere in Miami, I mean, just 10 out of 10, just chef's kiss. It doesn't get much better than that because of what Brett said, the story, the context, all of that matters. If you just look at that highlight in a vacuum, if it's on a highlight reel, it's a great knockout. But if you consider all the other things that play in that fight with that rivalry, that history there, just magnificent. I mean, it's just some of the best stuff, the richest stuff you'll see in all sports, I would say.
Already said easy against Perez, my fight of the 2023. So I'm gonna go with something different. Oliveira against Beneil Dariush in Vancouver. I think that kind of finish, a lot of people were doubting if Oliveira was still Charles Oliveira, and this is why he has become one of the biggest stars in the UFC in the last couple of years. He always goes for the finish. He always take the risk. This guy, like someone like Beneil, he's really good at jiu-jitsu. He's really good at striking. He was like so complete, and he went and finished him like really fast in the first round. I think the statement that Oliveira had there is just that's why he deserves another shot against Makhachev. I mean, he's the king of finishes in the UFC.
Increasing the list of post-fight bonuses and all that, deservedly so. Guys, it's clear it's been an exciting first half of 2023, both in the UFC and beyond. So I want you guys to forecast for us a little bit. Looking ahead, what is a fight or a storyline for the rest of 2023 that you are either interested to see happen, or in the case of a storyline, Brett, interested to see it play out?
Unfortunately, I don't think my fight will happen this year, although who knows? Israel Adesanya wants to fight every weekend, so maybe he'll continue to get, 3-4 more fights in the second half of this year. If I could make any fight right now, it'd be Khamzat versus Izzy. I just feel like the excitement level would be through the roof on that. I think Khamzat has obviously shown the type of potential you can't even quantify, you can't even measure it, and the way in which these two would butt heads during a fight week, I think would be the most entertaining fight week that we could possibly put together on paper for the UFC. So if I could put together any fight, it would be Khamzat versus Izzy. I don't think it'll happen this year. However, I mean, Paulo Costa looks good in Salt Lake, fights Khamzat in Abu Dhabi. Maybe Khamzat gets a win there, calls out Izzy. Potentially we could see it by the end of the year. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw it by the end of the year. What a way it would be to end 2023. So fingers crossed, maybe we'll get Khamzat versus Izzy in 2023. And the only other storyline that I would say is what's wrong with Valentina Shevchenko? She has not looked great, even in her wins over the last year or so. And now we're talking about Alexa Grasso beating her. She's going to be favored again in this one. I would just like to see what's going on with her. And is she going to come out and look like Valentina Shevchenko, this woman who just ran through people for basically a decade? Or is Alexa Grasso going to get her number and continue this Mexican dominance that we're seeing at the top of these divisions? I think it's very, very fascinating. But now that Amanda Nunes is gone, the throne is right there for Valentina Shevchenko. She had it, and then she dropped it against Grasso. So I'm excited to see what she looks like coming back from that type of adversity.
Marc, how about you?
I have to say the future of John Jones, because as Carlos mentioned earlier, he comes back. He hasn't fought in 3 years. He moved up the weight class. He's, a much bigger man, right? 40, 50 pounds bigger than he was the last time we saw him. And he goes out there and he just runs through Cyril Gane, who, it's not Francis Ngannou, who I think everyone knows is the top heavyweight in the world, but Gane is not far off, right? He's number 2, number 3. He's right there. And Jones, first time at heavyweight, just completely dominates him in like a minute and submits him. The next fight seems like it's going to be Stipe Miocic, hopefully at Madison Square Garden in November. I'm just curious if Jones can continue this run to heavyweight. If he wins that fight against Miocic, who is the most successful heavyweight in the history of the UFC, that's another notch in a belt that has every single notch imaginable. If you're John Jones, right? He's already done everything in the sport. He could add that win to it, and maybe he rides off to something after that. I don't think we're ever going to see that in Ngannou fight, unfortunately, but That's what I'm most interested in. And of course, I mean, I have to mention the McGregor stuff that Brett mentioned earlier. You know, that whole storyline is he going to fight this year? You know, I don't know. Is he in the USADA pool? I don't know. They won't get back to me. I have no idea if he's in or if he's not. But I do think he wants to fight. I do think that he will fight again. I don't know if it'll happen this year, but that's going to be a storyline, Phil, from now until December 31st. There's no doubt with Conor McGregor.
Yeah, once we get to November, Mark, it will have marked 7 years since Conor's win over Eddie Alvarez at UFC 205, which was such a crowning moment. And in that 7 years, he has one win to his name against Donald Cerrone at 170 pounds. Carlos, what about for you? Fight and or storyline that you are most excited to see play out the rest of 2023?
I'm excited to see what's going to happen in Boston with the future of the 135 division. What's Aljo's going to do if he's going to stay in 135, he's going to go to 145. There's Merab Dvalishvili that will be coming back at some point. There's still Peter Jan is still close. Corey Sanhagen is still close. So I think the future of the 135 division is going to be like really exciting. There's a lot of big fights that we can still see there. And I'm also interested in what's going to happen with the BMF because now that he's up for grabs and again, I mean, we have a great fight with Justin and Dustin, but I think people, for example, like Charles Oliveira, like Alexander Volkanovski, they might be interested also in fight for that, and because it's going to be a big fight and like challenge the BMF if the BMF is not fighting for the 155 belt. So I think those two main events like the one in Salt Lake City and in Boston are going to give you a lot of options and a lot of big fights coming up.
Well, the first half of 2023 gave us an all-timer of a technical fight, gave us something of an all-timer of an upset, a knockout that with given context and stakes, one of the most memorable any of us will ever see. If that is any indicator of what the rest of the year has to come, there's every reason for the excitement that these gentlemen have all demonstrated in Carlos, Marc, and Brett for what the last 6 months of this year will have for us in the UFC and beyond. And of course, keep it on ESPN.com/MMA and ESPN MMA's YouTube channels for all the latest development news, analysis, interviews, and the like for the world of mixed martial arts. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.